the effects of teachers on attendance and whether engaging teachers who are effective at reducing attendance have impacts on other outcomes. So Susanna is currently on the faculty at the Stanford Ed School, but is in the process of moving, starting, when is it? July 1, will be director of the Annenberg Center for School Education Reform at Brown. So we're, in honor of that, we ordered up this snowstorm that started just so that we'll start to break her into what
I'm running away.
A New England winter is like. So, welcome, Susanna. I promised to say, like, we can go all the way to 5:30. So, if you have questions at the end, we can extend the discussion until 5:30.
And something about inequality?
Yes, I said the inequality.
You did. Okay, I missed that. You got that? Hi, thanks for having me here. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about teachers and their effects on student attendance. And hopefully I can get this to go. No. I can do this. There we go. Okay, so first, for some shameless self-promotion, is I have this book that we just wrote that tried to look at like all the things we value in schools and tried to get a sense. Oh, will that work? Good. So then I can get off of this. Oh no.
You know, just have to press down a little bit.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, yes. So we care about all these things with students. And for example, we want them to develop this whole range of capacities like economic productivity and democratic competence. You know, we want them to be able to work in a democracy or participate, personal autonomy, healthy personal relations. You know, we're thinking, I think, as a country about all sorts of things we care about for students. Okay, I'm going to count here. Yet we tend to focus on test performance, and this isn't really all so bad. I'm trying to figure out how I should do this, sorry. I'll say, I'm sure this is live streaming really well. Yeah, so we focus on that, and I really think that it's not all bad that we focus on test performance. We do need those skills, and not only do we need those skills, but they're probably correlated with things that we value as well. But to the extent that schools and teachers and programs make some trade-offs in what they focus on, we're likely missing a lot by a lot of the strengths of some schools or some teachers. And maybe some of their weaknesses by focusing too much on test performance. So for teachers, what I'm going to try to do, again, is look at teacher effects on this alternative, which is attendance. So the previous literature, as you know, is focused a bunch on teacher effects on test scores in math and in reading. And we know that teachers vary a decent amount in those, and that how they do in terms of helping students in math and in English language arts, actually particularly in English language arts, which doesn't always get through, affects their long-run outcomes like earnings and things like that. But what's also important is the effect of a particular teacher is, if you look at the variation in how much teachers affect long-run outcomes, while their test performance explains some of it, we also aren't explaining a lot of it by the testing gains. So there probably are some of these other things going on. Okay, so a few prior studies have tried to estimate the effects of teachers on other kinds of outcomes. Okay, let's see if this works. Hey, look at that! Thank you. Okay, so most focus on elementary or middle school level, and they examine a range of outcomes. So we've had a study on psychological traits like growth mindset or grit, on self-efficacy and happiness, on academic motivation, on teacher-reported measures of children's social and behavioral skills, and to a certain extent on full-day absences. So there has been the effect of teachers on full-day absences in elementary schools. There's one study that's looked at high schools, and that's Bo Jackson's study, but it's only been on 9th graders, and he uses this kind of combination of GPA, on-time grade completion, suspension, and full-day attendance. Even though the teachers don't really see the student the full day, it attributes it to the teacher. So there's a paper that touches on this here, but it's a little bit removed from really a look at the effect on attendance. So I want to talk just a little bit about attendance. There's a little work done on attendance, not as much as you would think there would be. There's a paper that basically provides some causal estimate that reducing attendance reduces achievement. But there's also all of these kind of correlational evidence that kids who don't show up, not surprisingly, drop out more, higher drug use, more crime, all of those kinds of things. So there's a lot of correlational stuff around attendance. Some of the reasons that kids are not in school has to do with out-of-school issues, like the responsibilities at home or the pulls of social situations outside of schools, but others, like what the school does directly to keep kids in, as well as potentially how interesting it is to be in school, can also affect what goes on with attendance. So these are more kind of the pull, getting them to pull them in rather than push them out.
Susanna?
Yeah.
The studies about correlates with dropouts,
Yeah.
drug use, and crime, is the hypothesis that they have that students are not engaged in school, so they don't show up, and then they're bored, so they use drugs and commit crime, or is it that they have made up their mind to go commit crime and use drugs,
and so they don't show up?
School?
I don't think it's so well that it really could go either direction.
Yeah.
And so that's this kind of pull-push thing where you don't go to school, so all these opportunities open up. So it's, when schools close, there are lots of opportunities to do this as well. So it could go in that direction. Just if you're caused not to show up, you then do these bad things, or that there's something that you don't show up because you do them. I don't think it's well separated, is my sense. Is that all of, do any of you know that stuff that's separated that well? Okay, so the prior work that's most related is Seth Gershensen's study on elementary school attendance, and then Bo's study that I just talked about. And they both found a decently large effect of teachers on attendance. They focus on elementary and 9th grade. So this is just the same. So this is the teacher effect part, are those two studies. So what are we doing that's different? So all of those studies just use general attendance or general absence. What we're able to do here is look first at unexcused absences. So it's much more likely that a teacher or a school can have effect when a kid is just like not showing up, rather than if they have a doctor's appointment or something like that where they get this excused absence. And really, that's the issue with elementary school, too, is that it may not be kind of the teacher's control over a lot of the absences, whereas in high school, you may have a lot of unexcused absences where kids are just skipping. So having unexcused absences versus excused absences is one addition, just in terms of measuring this better. The second is we actually have every day whether a kid goes to a specific class as the absence, so that we can separate whether you're not there for the whole day versus you're not there for that class. And one, that's nice because descriptively that turns out to be really quite important. Not, saying a kid is at school because they've shown up for one class actually is not doesn't capture kids' engagement in school very well. So because of this, we can actually tack it to a teacher in a particular class. We're going to look at middle and high schoolers because they have, I think, more control, and we're going to be able to do this. We're going to do 7th to 11th grade. We don't do 12th grade for two reasons. One is that we don't have a test in 12th grade, and so what we want to do is kind of look at teachers' effects on attendance versus achievement, but also 12th grade, as we'll see, there's a lot of skipping going on, and it's really hard to know what's driving that. So we're just going to take out 12th grade. This is up there as a contribution because we spent so much time on it, but as it turns out, it didn't matter that much. We use these count models to do this instead. The other work that's been done on attendance has assumed that it's kind of a normal, continuous variable. Very bad, likely to have lots of problems, but then when you do it both ways, it doesn't really matter so much. But we'll go into that a bit. And then I think what's nice is that we can then look at some of the longer run outcomes. Not hugely longer run, but do they graduate from high school, and then what do they take AP courses in 12th grade, those kinds of outcomes, to see whether the effect that we see in the grade in like 7th, 8th, 9th grade that they have them seems to stick as they move through. And we're going to compare all the achievement to attendance of the achievement effect to the attendance effect. Okay, so that's where we go. So we've got 4 questions. The first is about variation, kind of we estimate these effects of teachers and how much you teachers actually vary in them. The second is about stability. So if I estimate this for a teacher in 1 or 2 years and then see that teacher a few years later, are the value addeds pretty consistent across those 2 time periods? I guess how well does a teacher's value added to attendance in the current year predict his or her future value added? And how does that compare for achievement? The third one is about similarity. So do teachers who are good at one, are they also good at the other? So teachers, does it matter? Is it that correlation I was talking about where, sure, we only measure one thing, but it's kind of this single dimension of effectiveness or quality, or do they seem like multiple dimensions? And then finally, kind of predictive validity. So if you get a teacher who's good at attendance, do you come more? And then also, if you get a teacher who's good at attendance, do some of your later outcomes look good as well? Okay, so it's pretty straightforward what we're doing. Okay, so the data comes from an urban district in California. We're going to look at 7th through 11th graders. The reason that we're not doing 6th, which is also in middle school, is because we want an initial control, so prior year scores, essentially. And we do, as you'll see, we'll do prior year attendance in the specific subject as well as in the other subject. So we get some kind of multiple prior year. School years 2003-4 to 13-14, so a good number of school years. This is how it works. Every day the teacher has to fill out a Scantron for whether the kid is in the class or not. So they do that for all the kids in the class. That goes into a central place. And then the clerk at the school records whether or not that absence was excused or unexcused. Yeah.
Susanna, are you worried at all that like some teachers might just be more diligent in filling out their attendance forms each year and so that they look, so that's one of the reasons to do this kind of predictive validity of it. But the other is just that you can see, it is possible that they're doing some of this, but I don't think they are. The general sense in the district is that they are not doing it, and I think they have reasons that they have to report these attendances that, then the schools can reach out or the district can reach out after certain amounts of time and stuff like that. Another way might be like to the extent that I come to school because of your class, while I'm there,
do you go to the other classes?
I go to the next class, maybe the class right after,
to see if that affects it. Oh, that would be really interesting. So I get a teacher who I think is good, and then I see whether that affects whether the kids go to the next class.
Are more likely. Are there spillovers onto the next class?
Exactly. Okay, let me think.
Because the idea is once I've come to school, my marginal cost of going to the next class is
It's
really pretty
definitely.
low.
And you'll
Yeah.
see, well, I'll show you the time of day when kids show up, because time of day does matter quite a bit. What's interesting is that subject matter doesn't matter very much. There are some significant differences, but there are a lot of days that kids can come and go, and a lot of kids over this time period. It doesn't matter that much what the subject matter is relative to when it is during the day and who the teacher is. Okay. Oh, and then we eliminate ones that look crazy, like kids who, well, not even crazy, but that they just might not be supposed to be there. So if they're not there for 50 days in a row or something like that, they're not counted. Or if the teacher doesn't fill out something for them during the year or whatever, we don't count it. But because we're not trying to get a measure of each teacher. I mean, we are going to, for this sample, calculate a measure of each teacher's value added, but this isn't an accountability system. We're just trying to learn, and so we're trying to narrow it to the groups that we have good information on. Okay, we're going to look at it for math, English language arts, science, social studies, and foreign languages. So we can do it for all those subjects, but in the comparison and in most of what I'm going to talk about, we're going to focus on math and English language arts teacher because that's where we've got the comparison to their test scores. But you can see kind of, I'll show you the variation of the other ones. We've got a lot of student demographics, grades 2 through 11, but I guess I only use 6 through 11. That's the eliminate the students, and so we end up with 184,000 or 185,000 student by year observations and about 9,000 teacher by year observations. Okay, so let's look at class absences and what they mean. So if you took a day, like you took the number of days a student shows up for school or could show up for school, they actually show up on average about 84% of the time. Where they're there all day. And 4% of the time, 4.2% of the time, they're not there at all. But then at 12% of the time, or 12.2% of the time, they skip at least one class. So they're only there part day. Okay, so it's a pretty big group where they're only there part day. Nearly 3 times as large. The other interesting thing about the part day is about 90% of the part day absences are unexcused. Okay, which isn't so surprising, but it's just interesting to look at. So 89% unexcused. So those are ones that we think maybe we can change, right? And this is grade 7th through 11th. Okay, so then if instead, so that was the perspective of are you there during a day, fully, partly, or not at all? Now we're going to the class level. Okay, so this is the number of absences from a specific class. Does that difference make some sense? Okay, so if you look at the red line and the orange line, those are excused absences, and what you can see is they're really pretty steady, 6th through 12th grade. Which isn't so surprising. You're excused for doctor's appointments about the same amount of time. It's about half a time for part day half a class for part day absences. So there's not too many part day absences with excused absence, but it's about 2 during the course of a year, or 2% of the time that you're there that you have an excused full day absence. Now if we look at unexcused, full day and part day, so full day is green and part day is blue, you can see that in middle school, in 6th, 7th, and 8th, they're fairly stable and kind of at this level at about 1 for full day and about 2% for part day, so basically just skipping the class. But then if you take a look at high school, it just jumps up a lot. So for example, if we take out 12th grade and kind of 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, you're absent almost 5% of the time because you're just not there for that class or for some class. Okay, so it's pretty big. Okay, so then let's look at some of these. This looks big because I'm going to show you a few other groups here. Oh, Eric.
The previous slide, is that a balanced panel or is the increase in 9th grade, is that like students who, the green line goes up and then comes back down a little bit?
Oh, so people who
Is
are...
That's
a good question. It's not a totally balanced panel, but I don't think it's because I don't think it's because their grouping the kids in 9th grade. But I don't know, I should look at that.
Or dropping out.
Yeah, the question is, are they dropping
Oh,
out?
it's it's not dropping, there's not big 9th grade dropping out, it's 10th, yeah.
Or
Between
just,
that, like it
but
goes up,
up
in
and
9th
goes-
grade.
Right,
Then,
The kids who just like aren't showing up drop out, so it comes back down.
yeah, right.
I don't think that's such a big deal in this.
or I think he's thinking, like, if you limit the sample to kids who were there through 12th grade,
Yeah,
so who don't subsequently disappear.
we could
You see
replot
that
that, yeah. I think we will still see that in 9th grade is a particularly stressful time. I don't know what proportion of the districts drop out, but it's not a big one for this. And if you look at the unexcused absences, I mean the part day absences, you don't see that as much. But I should try to figure that out. I like that. Thank you. Okay, so this is the time of day. So in almost all the schools, there's 7 periods. And what you can see is that about 5% of first period classes are missed. And these are non-special ed, non-African American students. They miss about 5% of first period, but then second and third, that's got pretty good you show up quite a bit for those two. The reason that I have this group is because then you can compare to special ed and you can see it is the beginning and the end of the day here too, and then at lunchtime people skip some too, and it's up to kind of, what is that, 14% of the time there. Now if you go to the side with the African American students, which is probably about 10% of the district, you can see that the numbers really are quite a bit higher. So if you look at the special ed population, it's about 24% of the time they're missing first period, but even the non-special ed, it's about 18 or 19% of the time missing first period.
You may have said this. How big is the district? Like, how many seniors are in this district? Like,
How many? So there are about 40,000 students in the district, but not in this senior.
Right.
Yeah.
Just, I'm confused with maybe this scale you said goes down to 0. Well, so this ends at 5. These graphs are, the minimum value is 5, but in the previous graph it didn't seem like anything was higher than 4.
That's because you have to add them up. Does that make sense? You have to add up the previous graph. Am I going back the right way? So, so let's say this, you've got 4 plus 3 plus.
I see. So
This
full day absence is going to be absent every period.
Full day absent will be absent every period, yeah.
Okay, so that basically what I should look at is the top 2, the full day. Oh, and then the other one also has excused and unexcused.
The next one has all of them in
Okay,
it.
I
Yeah.
totally get it.
Yeah. So yes, sorry about that.
No,
This
I-
is just kind of pulling them together to show you. But hopefully, what the variation here tells you, and this looks like small variation, but if I put it on a bigger graph, it wouldn't look quite so small. Okay, so that's what it looks like. But the distributions are very highly skewed. So this is the distributions now of unexcused absences, and we've got, a bunch who are way out here and a lot of zeros. Okay. Yeah.
What is the consequence in this district of an unexcused absence? In my high school, I think they suspended you and you weren't supposed to come back for a couple days.
So this district has no suspensions for absences. So they may have kind of in school, they more think of it as they need to go out and get the kids to come back in. They're not going to then be suspended for not being there. Or if there are kind of suspensions, they're in school. They're not going to be kicked out of school for not being there.
or if there's above a maximum number, they go to truancy. In a lot of cities, they have to file some kind of
With the parents and stuff like that. Okay, so it's not normal, so we're not going to use OLS, as I said, and we could do with this log transformation of it, but you don't really, since there's so many zeros, the log kind of gets messed up, so we thought we would use a count model, and there are really two count models that we considered. One is the Poisson regression model, but that one assumes that the mean and the variance are the same, and so then there's this 2-level negative binomial model, which adds one more parameter that lets the mean and the standard mean and the variance be different. Okay, so we're going to just first test whether these are different by creating both of them, and then seeing how well they predict. And so you see how well they predict by looking at what we observed minus what we predict. And you can see that the observations are way above the predicted in the beginning and way below for the one where we don't allow the extra parameter. So we redo this is the one with the parameter, and it's really like pretty consistently better. So we're going to run that one, okay? And I would have spent a lot of time on it, but we also run these with OLS, and it's really quite consistent between the two. But I'll show this to you in case this is a group that may like this. So this is basically the model where it's an exponential model, Poisson distribution, and here's where we're letting the gamma distribution have both the R and the P. And then we are getting this teacher by year effect, and we're looking at its distribution, and that's the variance of the teacher effect that we're going to use. Okay, and it's got, so that's how we create these teacher effects. And these are the controls we have in it, but it's just basically a lot of the typical controls at the student level, the class level, and the school level. But just if we look at the student level, we've got prior test scores in math and English language arts, as well as prior absences in math and English language arts. And those, once you get those things in, all the rest of these things are not quite as important.
So, are you accounting for prior, like, period effects? So if I am someone who lives far away, and so, you know, I'm constantly missing the bus, and so I am late for first period, you know, year 1 and year 2, and...
We do have that the class is a first period class, and we do have prior absent rate in the same subject. We don't have prior absent rate in the same time period. We could do that, I just didn't think about it.
I do mean class period, not time period. I meant class period.
Oh, that's what I mean. Like we could have done the year before how much you were absent in that time period, and we didn't. We just did how much you were absent in that subject area and in the other and in the math subject, like in the alternative. We could do it. We do have a control for being a first period class in there. We tried it with controls for the other ones in there too.
What kind of correlation do you see between absences last year and absences this year? You know, so like in a value-added model, the baseline test score is
it's really predictive, and I actually have. Can I give it to you at the end because it's one of the additional slides? Yeah.
For the test score literature, we have a pretty good sense of that. Like most of the variation, at least within schools, is to teachers. Do you model this with school level effects, and also what does the literature say about neighborhood contributions versus school level contributors to absences?
Yeah, no, those are good questions. So we do them both with school fixed effects and without. The school fixed effects in the value-added literature, people don't like those as much, so we don't actually use those, but at the end I'll show you one where we only look at variation of teachers within the same school to look at what happens and do it that way instead. But kind of to get at exactly what you're talking about. How much neighborhoods affect? I mean, I do think schools might affect attendance more because there are these kind of school-level attendance policies, though there are kind of district-level ones too. Neighborhoods, the polls would be different in different neighborhoods, but I don't think there's been enough systematic analysis of attendance for us to know kind of how much that's true. There's probably more on attendance than on achievement, just because I think achievement is so kind of naturally distributed.
Susanna, related to that, maybe, couldn't you estimate this with student fixed effects and sort of compare their absences across different classes in a way that might, I don't know, address potential concerns about...
Yeah, so we could do that, and actually we have tried some of these different ones. with the reason that we do the basic model is more just because of all the literature that's been done on teacher effects on achievement, some of which Tom's contributed to, which likes the models actually that don't have the fixed effects built in. And then we try to do this by looking at the variation after we've done that, within and between. But we can do, the student level one on the negative binomial we weren't able to do, but on the OLS one we can do that.
It would be different from student fixed effects across years, like is often done in the test score literature, because you're able to compare their outcomes in two different subjects
in the same
with
in
two
the
different
same year.
teachers the same year. It's sort of more like the research design Tom D and I use for class size effects.
Yeah. So we have that in looking at some of the characteristics of the teachers, but for the teachers themselves, we haven't estimated that way, and I need to kind of think about what would be the benefit or not of doing it. I think largely because we were doing these count models and it's more complicated to do that there, but with the OLS, since that works, it might be feasible to get it into those models, and so we could do that. This is still, by the way, a work in progress. It's not done yet. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Just a quick question. When is attendance taken? So if I show up halfway through a class, am I missing or am I...
I don't know that. So the teacher just has to report it after the class. So I think there may actually be a tardy as well as a not there, so in that way it's probably later in the class. Yeah.
So is baseline, in this case, just the year prior? Because I'm thinking about, with test scores, the baseline maybe we think of it as more of a summary of your mastery up until that point, but for attendance, I'm wondering if it makes more sense to think about like multiple years as a better summary of your prior performance.
Yeah, no, that is a nice observation, and we could do that. We just wanted to try to do it for as many years as we could, and so that's why we left out 6th grade. We could. Our worry going back to 5th grade was then it started to be in elementary school, and was it the parents or the kids, so we thought we should just limit it to middle schools. I think a lot of what, in terms of like the worry about measurement error, at least on test scores, my read of the literature, let's see how you think, is that if we have 2 measures of test scores in there in the prior year versus 1 measure in the prior year and 1 measure the year before, you're probably okay either way. Like, you want 2 measures in there. So that was our hope here. But it could be better to have more than that. It's pretty good. The R-squares and stuff are not so bad in terms of how predictive your attendance is one year versus the next. Okay, so variation, so the first thing is we estimated these teacher effects, but it's very hard in this model to exactly say what they are just from these numbers. The standard deviation for this is about 0.37. But what we can do is something called the incidence rate ratio, which is basically taking this and converting it to the percent, so that for math what this means, and we standardized it, so a student would have 44% fewer unexcused absences to a class if they had a teacher with who is 1 standard deviation better. So the effects are actually really kind of big. Now, 44% of 1 is not very big, so they're not having huge numbers of changes, but they are doing a decent amount on this. Now, one way of testing, is this all just sorting, is to look at their effect on, first let me describe across. What you can see is it's pretty consistent across subject areas. So it's 44% in math. It's a little bit higher in English, 54%, and in science, 52%, 50%, 50%. But really, my read is these are pretty consistent across areas.
You know if the teacher was absent?
Actually, we're just doing that now. So right now, we have, it's just such a great district for their data. We have, by day in class whether the teacher wasn't there and then which sub came in or whether they had a sub and all of that kind of stuff. So we're beginning to do that, but we're just in the beginning stages of looking at it. So I can't tell you how much, and I should because we've just talked about doing this, but I can't tell you how much the student absences line up with the teacher absences.
Have you compared this to if you ran it using whole day attendance?
So I did it compared to excused absences.
Well, because like lots of places aren't going to have this great data set that you have, and it would be useful to know, like if you what the sort of class attendance is buying you.
Yeah.
In other districts where we don't have it, we get relatively simple.
Yeah. So we have done it. I just don't have it off the top of my head. But yes, I agree. I agree with that. That it would be useful to have it as a comparison. What I wanted to do in looking at the excused absences is to say, okay, well, we think teachers may affect excused absences, which is part of what people have done. It's certainly more of what's in elementary schools, right, or excused absences. And we still find some variation across teachers, but what you can see is that it's really kind of substantially lower, which is what we were hoping, on excused absences than unexcused absences, because we might even think there's some sorting here. I'm going to do a bunch at the end to try to convince you that it's not sorting, but here I would worry more the fact that particularly if it didn't drop, I would worry. The fact that it's a little bit lower, or quite a bit lower, on something that we think a teacher is likely not to affect as much, I think is a good sign. Yeah?
How much of the variance is explained at the school level? If you don't have school fixed effects in here,
Yeah, I don't remember that. But we will, again, at the end I'll show you if I just use the variance that's within school. And the estimates are really similar.
Without pushing this too much, if you decide that you want to look at the mechanisms, I think it might be interesting to see if there's correlation in the days that people are absent. So that it's something like, today is the day that there's a substitute teacher, or that we're doing the paper cutting exercise that everybody hates, or that there's some exciting thing happening down the street. And I don't know which of this would be, but it might be interesting to see if that shows up.
Yeah, I really completely agree. So, and we just haven't, there are like a million things you can do with this, and I'm really interested too in how kids skip in groups. And so so one could be because of what's going on in the class, but then one could be because, your friend is skipping, and then
driver's license, we're going to go to the fast food place.
Exactly, and then there's been some work that other people have done on some of this stuff as well, and where they have found that if a friend, if you can get a friend to stay, then you're more likely to stay. So my guess is there are some spillovers. The teacher absences are really kind of interesting. You can see they're much more absent at Fridays and Mondays than they are the rest of the week. So there are these really clear trends on teachers, and to be honest, we haven't done it on the students, and I should, but it's partially because this is a work in progress, and partially just because there's so many things you can do with this that it's hard to kind of decide what to do. Okay. Okay, so stability. How stable are these? And I'll tell you two ways that we looked at it. This is just a basic transition matrix. So this is the average of year 1 and year 2 for teachers who are there 5 years and have these measures. And what's nice is, unlike test scores, it's more likely that you'll consistently have these measures over time because kids always have to show up to your class where they don't always have to take tests. But one thing you can see is if you're in the lowest quartile in year 1 or year 2, most of them are in the first 2 quartiles in year 3 through 5. And similarly, if you're high in the beginning, you're likely to be high. But this isn't perfect. I'm going to give you one other way that we looked at this, which was just like looking at the R-squared. So just one second, then I'll just describe this and then take your question. We regressed the value added in year 3 or in year 4 or in the average of year 3 through 5 on either your first year assessment, your second year assessment in terms of your value added to attendance, and just saw how predictive it was, how much of the variance it explained. And what you can see for math value added, and this is math teachers' attendance value added, you explain about 40% of it, of the variation in years 3 through 5 by their year 1 and year 2. And that's actually just about the same as it is for achievement value added for math. Okay, sorry. Yeah. No?
So can you go back one slide for a second?
I hate these transition matrices, but here they are.
So they're row percents. Have you calculated the chance agreement?
I don't even know what that is, so probably not. No, I'd like, what is
Well, it's basically the numerator of a kappa. Just figure out, given the marginals you've got, you need real marginals.
Yeah.
If it were random sorting, how many of them would end up on the diagonal just because of the limited number of categories and the skewness of the marginals?
Oh, but shouldn't you, so you've got 20% of your sample here, and you've got 20% of your sample, and you have 20% of your sample in each of those.
Oh, so the marginals are even, but yeah, it's just multiplying the percentages and doing counting the diagonal, which I...
Yeah, so here, and these are row percentages,
right.
So here you would expect it to be 20%, and it's 1. And here you expect it to be 20 and it's 15, 20 and it's 16, 20 and it's 22, 20 and it's 44.
No, I mean, if it were perfect consistency, you'd expect everybody on the diagonal, right?
Oh, I just mean like it was completely at random.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, if it's perfect consistency, everybody should be on the diagonal. And so, so if it was perfect, you'd have 100% here and none in there. But if it were random and none, you would do
20.
the 20 in
So it's
each.
just calculating where in between you are.
You're calculating where in between, and so that's why I went to this other one with where you explain the variation. That just works more in my mind, but either one is good. Okay, and ELA is like a little bit lower, so this one would be 0.23 and 0.28. So it looks like, oh, well, achievement value added is better in English, but, these are all very similar. Okay, so the third is the similarity. Let's see how... to what extent are teachers who contribute most to student attendance also the ones who contribute most to test performance? So you've got two mismeasured things because we did test performance. So then we just take the correlation, but we divide by the square root of the products of the reliability.
Yeah.
But then we also estimated it jointly. So we basically using OLS or using the other model, and then a random effects model, and then you can estimate the correlations directly. And so we have all of those here. And basically they're low. Whatever you do, they're low. And they're a little bit different. So this is Pearson. These are adjusted. Pearson for math, Spearman for math, and the joint model. But they were all at about 10%, right? And it's lower, kind of closer to 0 for English language arts. So the ones who are improving their English language arts test scores are really not improving their coming to class, and the other way around. It's a little more there for math. Yeah.
Have you looked at the sort of mechanism of those classes are easier? That the students are coming there's all this stuff about teachers who make you unhappy improve your test performance more. Or there's some stuff around.
Well, then you might think there'd be a negative relationship or something like that, and we're just finding that it's a little positive. It's just not perfectly. It's just not.
You might find it negative, but you could find. Sure, but I just if you're starting to explore what's going on.
Yeah, so we don't know actually the details of what's going on. So I guess, we haven't done that, but I think it really could go either way. If you're very hard and the way you improve achievement is being very hard, then you don't have students come. But I don't think we think that's really true in the world, right? That we think that, or at least I do, that there are some teachers that you learn a lot from and are engaging, and some where if you show up, you learn a lot from, but they're not engaging. And this isn't that surprising to me. That some of the teachers that are, on average, teachers who are better at getting kids to come to class are also better at achievement, but it's not a very strong relationship. Yeah.
I can't remember if one of the covariates was class size or not.
Actually,
students in a class.
I don't remember that either. I can go back and look. But I don't think it's going to matter. That kind of control probably won't matter very much.
I'm still thinking through why would teachers have an effect on attendance? What are the possible alternative explanations, especially given only the slight correlation between attendance and achievement? And I'm thinking maybe it's something to do with the kids in the class. And I do know you've got lots of other class level controls.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering about size.
But size, no. I'm not sure if we have size in there or not. But yeah, did you?
Is this only for the teachers in the grade that they take their state exams?
So in California, it's they take it 2 through 11.
Oh, okay.
So they take it every
Susanna, I'm still worried about some teachers might just be a little bit more diligent about filling out the attendance forms, and so it shows up as as a correlation from one year to the next, but it's just because I'm more diligent.
Yeah.
And I think one way to try to clean that up is if I'm the only teacher, if you look across 7 periods, if a kid is marked present or not absent for only 1 period during the day, you might say, well, okay, that's
probably wrong.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's good. We can do
just
those.
Do some kind of robustness check around that. Is it just that? Because that one teacher would show up as being hugely effective if they never mark anybody
So
absent.
we did get rid of teachers that never marked anybody absent. So we did some of those kinds of things. But it is true that if they did it some days but not others, we could have messed this up, and we probably should go back and check some of it. But we did do the basic kind of, well, let's see what seems reasonable and get rid of the unreasonable ones in this kind of push to let's look within things that look more reasonable.
And it could also be that some teachers, we had the question earlier about how do they treat tardy?
Yeah.
Well, some teachers might vary in
whether that's an attendance. That is true. So there's probably some measurement error in this, though they are given pretty good instructions, so I don't know exactly what they are.
Well, the point is it wouldn't be measurement error in the traditional sense.
Right.
It would look like
signal,
rather than...
I totally... But so the way that it's measurement error in my thinking of it is that, well, maybe that's just bias, but we wouldn't find, so I'm going to go now into the predictive validity. Does it look like we're actually picking something up here? So we might not be picking up, some of it might not be the right things that we're picking up, but we are going to be picking up some of it. Okay, so the first thing we look at is just let's estimate a teacher's value added to attendance and achievement based on times when the student is not there. Right, based on other years and stuff like that. And let me see if I get that teacher how I do. Okay? So first let's look at test scores. And what you see is that you look at your test score value added, and a teacher who's 1 standard deviation higher increases your test score by about 13% of a standard deviation. And attendance value added increases it about 0.5% of a standard deviation. But if you put them in together, only the test score value added predicts test scores. Okay, so this is they're kind of correlated, not that strongly, but still correlated, but it's all predicted by test scores. On unexcused absences, it's the other way. You have a higher value added teacher by test scores, you attend more, but yeah, it looks negative because these are absences. You're predicting the absence rate. You get a higher attendance value added teacher, you attend more, but it's all driven by the attendance value added. Okay, so there's just some that shows that at least what I've estimated for your teacher in prior years. Now this could be because they're marking them differently, but I think, so that's why we go to these other kinds of outcomes. Okay, so the longer run outcomes is basically two, I just measure them in different ways. So high school graduation or dropping out before 12th grade. These are both kind of progression measures through school. And then I have the number of advanced placement courses and credits. Okay. So on future outcomes, what we see is for graduation, and it's the same for dropping out, test score value added really doesn't predict dropping out in the district, but attendance value added does. And so there's something there about engaging and finishing school that you're getting through your attendance value added. If you go to the number of AP courses, they're both predictive. And they're both predictive at actually about the same scale. And that holds up having them both in there, unlike the test score one did. So these teachers are doing the teachers that are helping with test scores aren't necessarily kind of keeping you in school, and the ones who are affecting attendance are both keeping you in school and kind of helping with some of this achievement stuff. But what's interesting, and these numbers are not like huge, but still kind of interesting to me, is if you looked at the squared terms, there's actually, on attendance with graduation, it's positive, but it's a negative here. So it's kind of, if you have a really unmotivating teacher, that's really bad. But when you're getting higher up, the effects are less. And for attendance, that's the same for test scores. I mean, the same for AP credits, where like getting you in there and not having a teacher that's kind of making you disengage is important, but it's less important as they get better. But with test scores, it goes the other way. That what really matters is that you have a really great test score teacher. And I'll show you that, I don't know if these are very convincing, but these are the attendance, that's on graduation, these are AP classes. It curves a little bit down, so motivating teachers is important, but it's more important at the bottom. Like, you don't want a teacher that makes you want to leave school. But on the test scores, it's really getting the good teachers. That's the issue that's driving going to AP classes. Okay. And then I'm going to do a couple of robustness checks. Okay. Isn't that cool, though? I think that's cool, because it kind of makes sense, right? That the problem with a teacher who's unmotivating is much more around getting you to be like, I don't want to be in school. I don't want to go on to these things. Whereas the test scores, you really, having a great teacher that really helps you learn is important. Okay, so robustness checks. So basically, students systematically sort across teachers, and we've put a lot of controls in there to try to get around it. And that's what we've done so far. But we worry about both selection on observables and selection on unobservables. And we're going to do a little something to kind of first look at whether we think this is an issue. None of these are perfect solutions. They're just trying to give us a sense of whether these are likely to be an issue or not. Okay, so selection on observables, what we do is we predict their outcomes based on 6th grade. So based on your 6th grade, what do you think your probability would be of graduating, of taking AP courses, those kinds of things. And then we're going to use your teacher's value added to predict your real outcomes and your predicted outcomes. And we don't want them to predict your predicted outcomes, right? Because if they predict your predicted outcomes, then we're missing something. Okay. If the teacher's value added to attendance predicts predicted outcomes instead of true outcomes, then they may be biased. We use 6th grade math and English scores, absence rates, suspensions, race, gender, special education, English learner, and gifted status. Then we use these out of sample. We're just going to use the 7th through 9th grade, which is what I used above. Okay, so in graduation, you can see these are the real ones. So it had the 0.03 on graduation, negative 0.02 on dropout. But then once you get to the predicted, we don't see anything, right? We don't get an effect on the predicted. I actually have the one for the for the APs in on my phone, but I didn't have it when I put this up, so sorry. What's interesting is for test scores, you can see it on graduation, and actually you see it on predicted graduation, but it goes into the negative way. So it might actually be over-adjusting, which I think is a worry in some of these value-added to test score measures in general. There's more worry now that they're over-adjusting than under-adjusting. But for attendance, so we're not totally sure about achievement, but for attendance, it doesn't look like this is the issue. Okay, so then we want the unobservables, and all I'm going to do for this is say, okay, let me look both within schools, and I'm just going to compare teachers within schools by putting in a school by cohort fixed effect. So this is just about teachers who are teaching the same cohort of kids within a school. And then I'm going to say, okay, well, that's giving me some estimate. I'm going to do another estimate where I instrument which teacher they get by the average of their the value added across cohorts within the school. So then I'm just going to use the within school variation. So this is, this is using within school, and this is going to be between school, and that's just going to kind of show us where our estimates are coming from. Okay, and so what we see, if we look at attendance value added, is this is graduation with the school fixed effects, so we still get something with school fixed effects. And this is a little bit lower when we look, we use the between school variation. So the within school variation, like having those school fixed effects in, if anything, raises our estimates. But in both cases, we're getting kind of a positive effect of attendance value added on graduation. So these aren't the perfect, it's hard to do this perfectly, but these are kind of two different kinds of ways of thinking about how much selection is likely to be a problem, both that predicted way and then by separating the variation. Okay, so a summary of the findings. We have, I think this on its own is just really important to remember that this like skipping class is actually explaining a lot of why kids aren't in class in middle and high school. And so even if none of this teacher stuff matters, this is an important thing to be thinking about what's going on. The second is that at least to us, we feel like there is some evidence that teachers explain some of this. Certainly the period of the day, likely the school explains some, but the teachers are having an effect on whether the kids are coming to class in that school, in that year. They're not the same as test scores. It's not just good teachers. It's actually potentially, teaching is multidimensional. They're affecting a whole bunch of capacities, and we probably want to think kind of more systematically about all the different capacities that we care about and whether or not they're likely to be kind of correlated with each other or not. And then trying to figure out kind of like the questions you've been asking, which I think are really good questions about what teachers are doing to engage students. No, that's going on my next slide. That's the implications. This is basically saying that if you get a good teacher in terms of engaging them, that actually has long-term consequences for your engagement in your school and whether you're likely to complete. And then the implications are more that it's multidimensional, that teachers' effects on these other dimensions may explain why teachers seem to have these long-term effects that we haven't explained by their effects on test scores, and it's likely to be worthwhile to understand this better, like what teachers are doing to engage students. Thank you.
I am so curious to know whether or not the teacher's effects on the students are outcomes other than academic. So like the motivation for this is like, oh, maybe we'll help the kids be more democratic, or maybe like, are there in your data or places you could get outcomes that are not academic?
That's a good question. I don't really know. I have to think about it. So
even something like enrollment in extracurricular.
Right, that's just what I was thinking, is like, are they participating in extracurricular activities?
Otherwise, I wouldn't be worried, but I would keep thinking about things like, well, maybe these are the bad teachers. I actually want them coming to teachers to be a good thing. Like if it's only a little bit correlated with test scores, I want it to be sure it's doing something good.
Right, though it's a little bit correlated with test scores, but it predicts these it predicts finishing school, and I think we all believe finishing school is like a concrete outcome that we really care about in students. But it would be really nice to see if we could, they should have those measures of...
Especially since the motivation is, finishing school is great. If the motivation is a larger set of outcomes that might be important, finishing school is still kind of the academic outcomes.
That's right. So I'm trying to think of what it could be that we could measure. And it's possible that I have extracurriculars, but I'm not sure, to be honest. I've never looked at it. I certainly know all the classes that the kids take. So if they're taking, like if you get to take yearbook as a class, I know that, or newspaper as a class or something like that. But I'm not sure I would know otherwise if it goes on their transcripts. You don't work with this district. You haven't worked with this district. So I should know that, but I don't. I'm wondering some other things. One of the things I wanted to look at too was something like grades, and even though that's not that's academic as well, but kind of how much grades are effort versus skill, we don't really know, and so maybe there's something about engagement there, but I think that's a really good question. Yeah.
So do you have a variable in there about what track the kids are in?
We do have controls for the class and which tests that, when in the grades where they take different tests, math tests, we have which tests they're taking in both the attendance and the achievement.
So that's controlled for rather than looking at differences across?
We don't have like straight tracks. It's not like you're in the college track kind of stuff. It's much more, you might take a different math class. Pretty much everyone's in the same English class. And actually the math class stuff, they're now all in the same math class too, which is different, yeah.
Do you have anything about whether it matters when you have a teacher who's good at affecting your attendance for like whether you graduate? Like, does it help me just as much if I have a great, like a really engaging teacher in 6th grade as opposed to like junior year?
We haven't looked at that, but that's a really good question. Sometimes it gets harder. I think maybe if I could try this in a somewhat bigger, we might be able to tell whether it's, we did 7th to 9th in what we're predicting here, so we haven't really looked at 10th. That just seemed kind of too close. But I don't know if it matters if it's 7th, 8th, or 9th, or one of those. So we could look at that. That's a good question. Did you have a question too?
Sure. I was just wondering, when thinking about the correlation between attendance value added and test score value added, should we be worried about test score missingness? Like, are the teachers who are really good at getting you to show up for class also the teachers that are good at getting you to show up for the exam? And does that mean we're dropping really low value added teachers who are low value added on attendance from that figure?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So we don't, the teachers match clearly in that, the way that we've estimated, the teachers match perfectly in having both. There is a lot of pressure on the districts to test everybody, and so in that way it's more than you would expect that the kids get tested, but it is possible that there's a little bit of that going on. I don't know, I should look at the... because we have the same kids in there for the teachers and attendance and achievement. So in that way, they should be the same here. Yeah.
So just thinking about some of the robustness checks you did in terms of the effects we're seeing from these high or low value added test scores and things. Test scores, like, everyone can kind of theoretically be improved, right? There's no ceiling effects.
Yeah.
But for absences, you have basically 80% of students who can't get any better at absence.
Yeah.
They can't come to school more often than 100%. So can you look at take the value added as sort of pre-treatment thing, look at the students who come in the next year, and see if there's differential effects by that predicted?
Yeah, I think that's that's really a good point, and I need to do that, and I have it written down actually to do it, but I haven't done it. Yeah, because you would definitely expect the achievement effects to be maybe broader on your population and the attendance effects to be on the people that wouldn't be attending anyway. Yeah. And I mean, I think the reason that we can estimate this through OLS is that even though it's only some kids that never show up, most teachers have some of those kids in high school in their class. So in that way, we can get estimates on all the teachers. It's just maybe it's like this really big effect, but only for this one predicted group. And it's silly that I don't have that in there. So that should be there. Yeah.
If I'm not wrong, California goes during your period from having a high school exit exam to not having a high school exit exam.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like you might be actually pretty interested in the effects on high school graduation before or after. If you're, right, like if you don't have, right, like before, even like, like attendance has to have some achievement effect to get them to graduate. And after there's almost a mechanical effect where if you're attending class, then you're more likely to pass your class.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons that we also have dropout before 12th grade as one of the outcomes there. But I think you're right that way. And the effects are the same, essentially. It's consistent on dropout before 12th grade as it is on official graduation. But it is true we could look at it before and after. I don't actually know exactly which year it ended. I think, do you remember which year?
2016.
Which
might be too early.
It's past that's 2016. We don't go to 2016
you don't go out. Okay.
because we're doing this all with the CST because we didn't want them once it went to the Common Core data. So we only go to 2014.
Yeah, it's not I was more just like curious actually, as opposed to like a threat.
Yeah, but graduation is always this tricky variable, and so that's why we like to measure it both ways. But yeah, we don't have the more recent test on there just because it would have, I wasn't, I didn't want to have to equate it and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I'm curious if you've sort of come back to the district with these results and what their response was and what they're thinking about how they're using it, and more broadly how we should be thinking about teacher effects on absenteeism given, specifically even in this context where that's measured by a teacher, the teacher filling it out him or herself, and like how that would, influence potentially negative behaviors on trying to up attendance.
Yeah, actually, so they have in the last couple of years put in a much stricter test on the attendance in each class. So now I think there's there are these kind of stricter rules and tests, and it's electronic and stuff like that. I don't quite know exactly what they're doing, but this is under the old system, which had more of a potential because the teachers were filling out the Scantrons. That said, the district is super interested, and the tricky part about this data is because it's so micro, it's kind of hard for them to get their hands around it. It just takes a while to clean it up. And so they're really excited that we could clean it up, and that's why we now have the teacher attendance and the subs and stuff like that, because they really want to kind of understand the dynamics that are going on. The substitute stuff is kind of amazing. Like the difference in whether substitutes go to some schools versus other schools is very unequal and interesting to see. So this has made them very interested both in kids skipping class and also kind of trying to understand what's going on, not just with some of these aggregate measures. So that's been cool. Yeah.
Sort of back to this age-old challenge in research and in studying teachers in particular of we have a thing that we observe, but we think it might be telling us something about something broader. So we've sort of rocked back and forth in this conversation between a mechanistic hypothesis about if you show up more, then you will learn more, and something more like the title suggests, which is that some teachers may be good at engaging students. So I'm wondering, the specific test that I have in mind, the specific question I have in mind is do the teachers' effects on absences, do they predict AP courses among students who, almost, it has to, but do they predict AP course taking among students who are already attending 100%? That is, is it something, are we just picking up something about engaging teachers which is imperfectly measured in absences, but is affecting the kids who can't get any better on the absence measure, but can get more engaged.
Yeah.
Like if you just limited the sample to kids who are perfect attenders or near perfect attenders.
That's really a good question, and I think that's what we need to do. We need to separate out these different students, both on how it affects graduation clearly, because that's going to be one margin. I do think that the fact that it's not the same as value added to test scores means that they're doing something more than just getting them there and teaching them more. That there's something else going on, but I don't know kind of whether it is. My guess is because it affects APs, which I didn't expect it to. I was in some ways a little disappointed that it's more than just getting them there. But that's a good thing, that's if it's engaging other people and kind of liking what's going on. That's good. Heather.
So one of the things that I always try to counsel doctoral students on is you want to get many papers out of the data set once you've spent all this time reviewing it. And so I'm curious, this sounds very rich. If you could talk a little bit about what else you can do with this data set. What else is kind of on the agenda or on your mind? Or you talked a little bit about the sub situations. So maybe you can expand on that.
Yeah, so I think there's lots of things that we can do in terms of understanding. So the first paper is actually not here. Well, it had some of those first findings, which is just like a description of kids skipping. And that's what we're doing with the subs paper too, is we're just kind of describing how often teachers are absent and when, and which subs are coming in, and how long subs are there. But I think there are lots of kind of interesting questions that we've talked about a little bit, which is how much are what schools doing mattering, how much are what teachers within schools are doing, whether the kids are kind of, how much spillover there is in what happens with kids, and then whether they're some of these discrete changes that can happen. There's a really nice paper that Emily Penner and Tom Dee did on this ethnic studies curriculum that's in district, and there are programs like that could affect given the demographics of the kids who aren't coming to school or who are skipping classes more, some of those kinds of concrete things we might be able to see kind of spillovers across classes, or once you take it, your trajectory changes. So I think there's all those kinds of exciting, both descriptive and causal things that would be interesting. So on the descriptive side, kind of where the variation is and whether you're seeing kids together or not, and then on the causal side, are there things that have gone in that have shifted it? But I think this engaging in school is so important, and that some of the things that are going on in high schools now are so disengaging that as much as we can think about what are the things that kind of get kids excited about school, that's a really kind of potentially productive area to be in. Oh, yes, good. Mark.
Following some of your earlier work on teacher effects and heterogeneity across subgroups, have you thought about how this might vary across subgroups, teacher effects on attendance?
Yeah, so in terms of different groups of students and things like that, yeah, so that's kind of what Thomas was asking about earlier too. And actually Eric also, so I think that I haven't done it clearly, but that is a really important thing to try to understand. Are there groups that are more affected, not only in how much their attendance increases when you get these students, but really in if this is a measure of engaging teachers, how much that affects their later outcomes. So I think it would be really interesting. I mean, the first group to look at is those who are most likely to skip. So I think getting kind of a predicted skipping and how that works. But then there are questions about, are there certain kinds of teachers who are better able to engage kids, and are some of the different kinds of stuff about effective teachers with different kids, which I don't think there's that much, but there's a bit. Whether any of this is being driven by engagement would be kind of interesting to see.
Or I was wondering, are there, if I were a school principal and I had some of these estimates of, okay, here are some of my high attendance teachers, where would I schedule them during the school day in order to maximize like the positive spillovers? Like, so
Yeah.
would I say, okay, Susanna, super engaging, we're gonna stick her in the first period
Yeah.
because we're gonna, we wanna push, do we wanna push all our most engaging teachers to the beginning of the school day?
She doesn't have a time charter. She can only be in one place at one time.
Yeah. It's not like us teaching. Right. Most teachers teach most of the day.
Yeah.
But
like the first period.
Right, but do you want to get kids who you worry about with the teachers? Yeah. No, I think that's a good question. What's interesting is we've interviewed a lot of principals in the other stuff I've done about the teachers they'd really like to keep and the teachers that they'd really like to leave. And what they talk about is motivating kids. They rarely, even in the places where I've done this, have tended to be quite strong, value-added kinds of places that care a lot about test scores, and the principals are focused on test scores. But particularly in math, for some reason, when they talk about it, that what they want are these teachers that motivate, and what they're not. So this is just anecdotal from the interviews we've done, but. That points to me just like something about these teachers, the principals are really thinking about their motivating teachers. I don't know if it's like the right time of day or whether they target motivating teachers to certain groups of students or something like that, but that would be really interesting to see. We've done some things like have we done, well, you know, whether principals try to keep some teachers or not others, and who they assign, which students they assign high value added teachers to or something like that. So it would be, you know, super possible to do that here, to see whether teachers, once they've demonstrated their ability to engage, whether they get assigned to different kinds of kids, and we haven't done any of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the more salient question there is about like, trajectory, right? Like these attendance is behavior. In some ways, that's a response to a teacher or other factors. In some ways, it's also a habit, right? And so, if you can get people on a different trajectory early, especially as we saw in that 9th grade year, where the absences go way up, and that's Allensworth, Easton, and Belfast, all of them. But looking at attendance, future attendance based on teacher value added could be really interesting that way. And then you start talking about where you put teachers, putting them in the 9th grade teaching teams versus the 12th grade teaching teams, right? Yeah, we see more attendance in 12th grade, but we put them in the 9th grade, we can solve both our 9th grade and our 12th grade problem over time.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question. And I mean, even just to start by seeing if any of that stuff is happening would be kind of interesting.
Yeah,
to see.
right.
Yeah.
So there's one more hand up, and then we need to thank Susanna.
No, I just wondered if you talk to students, because I was in a high school recently and we've been doing projects on attendance.
Yeah.
And some of the students I talked to are very rational. Like they know exactly what classes they can miss and just do fine.
Yeah.
So like some of this attendance is like just smart behavior by kids that know they're going to pass or know that they're going to do fine. And how do you separate that out from like bad habits? So kids that are not going to do fine. And it's really messy, but I wondered how much you've been able to kind of try and figure out the student motivations. And I know it's hard to attach that to the data set, but I do think that, some kids are really strategic about their absences, and how do you separate that out, and how does that affect a teacher's value added on attendance? Because you could be a very engaging teacher, but you also have some really smart kids that know they're going to pass, and they don't actually have to show up to first period to do that.
Yeah, no, that is really a good question. We haven't estimated, like, could we get a better estimate if we took out all teachers' first period classes or something like that? But I think some of this heterogeneity by students would really help with this. I skipped a lot of classes. Maybe that's why I'm interested in this, and passed. But it's but some classes you want to go to because you're actually the margin isn't passing. It's like you're actually learning something, and so that's kind of the hope. Like you want kids to go to class even if they're going to pass. But I think we could do some of the separating by just kind of predicting whether the kids are passing isn't the margin that they're worried about.
But you could look and see what's the relationship between your grades and your absences across classes, and that would give you a sense of classes where, in fact, the absence somehow matters more.
Yeah, that is true. Particularly, and you can look at it over years, too, so within a subject or something like that, because otherwise you have to worry about it. Yeah, I like that.
So, just wanted to